Our next speaker is Dr. Traci May-Plumlee, BS in Apparel Design from Kansas State University, has a master's in clothing and textiles from Arizona State University, a PhD in textiles and apparel technology and management from North Carolina State University. I think North Carolina is taking over this conference. Let's see. Currently, she's assistant professor of textile and apparel technology and management at North Carolina State University, director of the Annie Albers Scholarship Program in Textile Design, and her research interests presently are in technology, intensive textile product design and development, and also functional design. Her topic is impact of digital printing on material utilization and design aesthetics.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. One of the most intriguing new technologies in our field, I feel, is the idea of digital printing on textile fabrics. It has tremendous potential for really changing products in terms of the aesthetics, in terms of our design capabilities. It allows us to think about and work with creating product and creating textile design simultaneously so that we have complementary kinds of products. What I'd like to focus on today is the idea of material utilization for products that are made using digital printing technology and the idea of how it impacts design aesthetics. So, the purpose of my talk today is really going to be to examine the impact of digital printing on the textile surfaces, on sewn product design and development in terms of both the material utilization and in terms of the design aesthetics. I'm going to start with looking at the material utilization. And what I'd like for us to think about here is that when we create a sewn product, say apparel for an example, a garment may be as much as 40%, well actually typically at least 40% of the cost is just in the fabrics that go into the product. If we think about a fabric that has special design features or special limitations in how we can cut it and use it, then we may have 50 to 60% of the cost of the product, the end product, just in the fabric. I'd like to start with just a brief comment or two about the idea of grain orientation and some of the limitations on cutting fabrics. I wasn't sure how familiar the delegates would be with the process of cutting fabric for a garment or for a product, so I wanted to talk about it just a moment. When a product is to be manufactured, we lay the pattern pieces out in what we call marker or cutting layout that controls where each piece is cut from the fabric. The limitation in doing this is primarily the grain orientation. And grain refers to the direction of the yarns in the fabric, or if it's a knitted fabric, the direction of the wales. Any product is cut with some specific restrictions on how those pattern pieces might lay in relation to the grain. Typically, patterns are marked so that each individual piece of the pattern must lay parallel to the warp yards in a certain orientation of the pattern. In addition, there may also be directionality in the fabric. That means that not only must we take account of which direction the yarns run, as in this example, where we can take a pattern. I don't seem to have a pointer here. So as we look at these two pattern pieces here as an example, this would represent the top of each pattern piece, and we're able to lay that top of the pattern in either direction on the fabric. But for some fabrics, we don't have that flexibility. In this example, what would be the top of the finished product is actually laying at the same direction on the fabric, which means we're able to use the fabric less effectively and in fact have a greater waste in terms of cutting. Now, sometimes that can be the result of just the texture of the fabric, such as in this case where it might be a corduroy. It has a fuzzy surface, but sometimes it's also related to the design of the fabric. That used to say traditionally engineered design. What we have here is an example of what a fabric might look like if we laid out the pattern in order to allow or control how the stripe or plaid in the pattern laid on the garment. So we've got 3 pattern pieces here plus a pocket, and they've been spread out and arranged on this fabric so that when the fabric is cut and the product is sewn together, that these stripes that we see here will match on the finished garment. And typically this is the kind of thing we would need to do to control how a pattern or a design lays on a finished product. So you can see that these areas around the pattern pieces are areas where the fabric is in fact being wasted. It's not fabric that's going to end up into the final product. If we're able to digitally print or digitally engineer a design, we have something like this where the pattern pieces are laid out very closely because we're only dealing with the limitation of the grain orientation, and then we can control where the design prints so that in the finished product the pattern or the design will align as we would like it to, but we don't have to waste the fabric. As you'll notice here, there is some waste, but a much more limited amount of waste than we would find with this kind of a layout. So in comparing the amount of fabric, if you can imagine that it would take to do this versus the amount of fabric that it's taking here, we can see already that there's an obvious savings in terms of the fabric utilization, or how much fabric is it going to take to create this product. Now, in addition to that, one of the advantages that comes with working with digital printing is that if you want garments or products to be in a variety of colors and a variety of patterns and a variety of prints, you don't have to buy fabrics in all those colors and prints and designs. You can purchase white fabrics and then print each fabric differently to create different aesthetics. So not only are we saving fabric and material in terms of how we're utilizing the layout of the design, we're also saving fabric in terms of what we must keep in inventory and how much we're able to keep in, or how little we're able to keep in inventory. Substantially less if we're using or taking advantage of digital printing technology. The next couple slides simply show some examples of what these garments look like when they're cut out and assembled. These are simply samples to kind of allow you to compare these designs that were presented in the previous slide. This design is the product that was created from the fabric that had the pattern spaced out and arranged to cut from a traditional sort of print that you would buy yardage, or fabric yardage, and then print or lay out the pattern to cut so that the print matched. This design, or this garment, is one that would have been digitally printed and how it would look in the finished product. There are a few things that you can notice here from the front view. Probably most obvious is here at the bottom. Because this was cut out of what would have been a traditional piece of fabric, the stripes or the lines in the product go straight. Unfortunately, when I cut a product that has a flare or a fullness and a curve at the bottom, it looks very different, and in fact the stripes seem to go almost this way because they don't conform to the shape of the product. Whereas if we digitally engineer, even though on the pattern or the actual printed fabric, these lines curved, on the finished product they seem to be very straight and very complementary to the aesthetics of the design. Here we see some other views of the same product. The traditionally engineered, or the one that cut from yard goods, and the digitally engineered one, or the one that would be created from fabrics that we print to complement the design. Notice we see the same kind of effect in the back, where the stripes create almost the illusion of going the wrong direction because they don't follow the shape of the garment, whereas here the stripes follow very neatly the shape of the garment. We also see a very different effect at what would be the side seam, where these garments sewn together down the side. Here, because the stripes go straight and we have an angled seam at the side of the product, we create what I would refer to as a chevron sort of effect, or a V sort of effect that happens. Whereas here we have a very smooth stripe that follows the shape of the garment and in fact almost completely camouflages the seam. So these are some of the aesthetic impacts we see in a very simple sort of design. What I'm going to show you through the next several slides are some examples of my colleagues' work from North Carolina State University and from another friend and colleague at Industry Consortium, also in North Carolina. But I'm going to use these to illustrate some of the points about the design aesthetic and how different design can be. This is a garment that has been cut but not yet assembled. And you can see the wonderful floral effect here that will be brought together at the side seam when this garment is assembled. Notice the floral effect on the sides of it. Imagine if we were to cut this from a printed yard good, how much fabric we would need to use in order to get that design to lay the way we would like it to. This is another design that's also done digitally engineered. This is a wonderful garment with these very, very large-scale butterflies and flowers on it. And there are many seams in this garment that become almost virtually invisible due to the very close engineering of the design. This is a seam along the garment, and you can see how precisely this design matches. Again, imagine the scale of this design and how much fabric it would take to produce this by a traditional way if we were trying to cut fabric to make a design match like this. You can see here how this type of product might be printed, so that the pattern pieces are printed in such a way that it takes really a minimal amount of fabric and the design will match very closely and very effectively when the product is completed. These are a couple of examples, front and back view of a garment that was created by Carrie King at Textile Clothing Technology Corporation in Cary, North Carolina. And there are several things that are happening here that are very different than we would be able to do with traditional fabrics and traditional cutting. Here you can see this stripe that matches all the way up the back and across the collar, whereas on the front collar goes a very different direction. See these stripes that come up and run directly onto the collar from the garment is something we would not be able to do in a traditional fabric because it would completely go against the restrictions that we have regarding the grain. There are also what we call darts in this garment, very shallow kind of fitting seams, and the product has been engineered so that the darts become almost invisible and the stripes and pattern continue straight across the product. This is a garment that has not yet been constructed so that you can see. This is the dart area. And you can see how the buildings that are going to be in the finished product have been distorted around the shape of the dart so that when they're sewn together, you get a very continuous look and the impression that this design continues right across the structure of the garment. This is a wonderful design that has an effect that we might associate to something similar, though not exactly, like we may be able to achieve with a border print, again using very, very much fabric. However, we couldn't get this wonderful variation of the colors and textures and this wonderful quality and richness of color with traditional printing methods. Excuse me just one minute. This is a piece that was done by one of our graduate students. It's particularly unique in that you may be able to see over here, there's these wonderful images of an infant's face. It's a family piece incorporating some very strong memorabilia from the family. There's also some writing in here that's very, very subtle. And this idea, this ability to bring in personal sorts of features and details is something that is, again, unique to the idea of digital printing. This is a wonderful piece that features a tremendous amount of layering and detailing in the design. Again, that the design continues seamlessly across the structure of the garment. And some wonderful detail here in the back of the design. Things that we're, again, unable to do with traditional printing processes. You can see the wonderful detail in the fish and the lily. Lest I leave you thinking that this is only useful for apparel, it does have applications for home furnishings as well. This piece is a fabric design that was engineered for this particular chair. This is kind of the mark or the pattern pieces. Again, this is a case where we find that fabric utilization is a real issue. When we get into the furniture industry, it's even more of an issue than it is with clothing and apparel. And another example of a home furnishings or an interior sort of piece. So, as we think about this process, what I'd like to leave you with is this idea that this is a very, very intriguing new technology with lots of potential, both in terms of how we utilize fabrics and in terms of the aesthetics of the designs that we're able to create. It's a very unique process, provides us with capabilities that we haven't had in the past. And this is what I feel personally is the strength of this process. The idea that we can create pieces that are unique and different than perhaps we've ever been able to do before. There are limitations right now in terms of the production capabilities, but those are being addressed and worked on continuously. And there are lots of indications that soon they won't be the limitations they are. And this last slide just is sort of to illustrate how our process is impacted if we're able to take advantage of this digital printing technology by comparing a traditional process to this integrated textile and apparel design process, allowing us to save not only fabric, freeing up creative options, and actually allowing us to save time in the process if we're able to take advantage of this, allowing us to create product at a time that's closer to the consumer and closer to the time we're ready to deliver it to market. Thank you.
Have you any sample, please?
I don't. I wish I would have thought.
Imagine this process.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding you.
Have you any samples?
No, I'm sorry. I wish I had thought to bring.
It's very important.
I do have. One of my colleagues has samples. Okay. I didn't know I had samples.
Can we pass those around? Question? We have time for one, maybe two more questions. We need to move on. Hello? You can have a discussion afterwards.
I'm intrigued by the notion that you're putting forward, and it puts a different context completely on the relationship between the designer, the producer, and the customer. Have you given any thought as to that relationship? In other words, how does the customer actually go about acquiring those products? Isn't he going to occupy quite a different role and position than a normal, traditional context?
Absolutely, and it's a wonderful question because one of the things that really intrigues me is how we bring the consumer into the design process. There are some wonderful opportunities here and also some challenges in terms of bringing that consumer in. One of the things that I find to be a tremendous opportunity to build an avenue is the idea of the internet and electronic communication that we have. As an industry, we have a real opportunity to build one-on-one relationships with our customers very, very simply, very directly, and an easy interchange of information. There becomes some challenges in terms of execution because will have to be decisions made about how much creativity and how much input a consumer can have and how that will impact the cost, how many choices.
Well, I was just going to ask that. That was my second question, in terms of stock. I mean, because the possibilities are just enormous, there's got to be some restriction in terms of stock control.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that we have done at NC State as kind of a small-scale exploration is that we do have a dress design that we work with students to develop customized products from. And it has a very limited number of variations, a scoop neck and a V-neck and a square neck and some real simple limitations. But it's a challenge because it's almost exponential in terms of each piece, each option that you add.
Just one final very quick one. I mean, do you see that with the advent of something like digital printing, it actually puts the role and position of the designer in quite a radically different position in the future?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I see it as a very challenging and exciting position. I think that the average person has many ideas in terms of what they're interested in design, but in terms of how to execute them, I see the role of the designer being to some extent what it has always been, but I also see lots of other opportunities in working one-on-one in more of a custom kind of situation that we haven't been able to do for a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark.